this about two things now. I'm interested in why you're so fascinated by the relationship of a geometric shape that can be arrayed in a variety of different manners to this underlying problem of mapping. So you're reducing or establishing a relationship between the problem of mapping a large terrain to the utilization of like very stringently defined, what would you call them, representational systems, or that's a geometric form. What is the geometric form conceptually in relationship to the problem of mapping?
Well, you had a shape, and then you have certain rules about which pieces will fit next to it. But there's certain freedom in that rule. You could put this one that way or another way, you see. And, you know, if it's a shape which very clearly has to fit that way next to it, then it just repeats, you see. But if there's some freedom as to what the next one will do, then you might have to make that choice, and certain choices will run you into difficulties later, and other choices maybe will allow you to continue.
Is there a relationship between that and what composers do with music? Because I mean, there's a certain
Yes.
repeating determinacy in music, but obviously a composer just doesn't take a pattern and repeat it indefinitely. They take a pattern, and the pattern seems to allow for some choice in movement from that pattern forward.
Well, maybe, I don't know. I mean, what makes a piece of music into a good piece of music? I mean, I have no idea. That's a much deeper issue.
Well, we do know a bit about it. We know that if it's too simple and repetitive, your interest gets exhausted. Yes, exactly. It gets stale very rapidly.
Sure.
And then as it moves towards purely unpredictable, it becomes indistinguishable from noise. So there's some place in between there, and you could probably move on that place where you get some ultimately harmonious relationship of predictable form and, well, something like the play of novelty that seems to me to be analogous to that possibility of shifting the shapes in this tiling problem. I mean, I think music is tiling something.
Yeah.
It's a representational form.
Okay. No, there's probably some connection. It's just that music, I mean, there's so much more freedom as to what you do. You see, with these tiling shapes, it's forced on you that either it fits or it doesn't, you see. With music, it's much more subtle.
Right.
So I would hate to make too much of a comparison.
Of a leap.
Between
Yeah.
the two.
Yeah. Fair enough. One more question along that line.
Yeah.
Now, that triangle you made,
Yes.
now, what's the relationship between those paradoxical forms and the tiling problem?
Not much.
Because they seem to be, there's a play of representation and image there. I mean, one of the things I've been wondering, I looked at all your diverse contributions and I thought, wow, there's a lot of things happening in a lot of different places, but there's something that's not random. There's something at work that's a kind of a uniting principle that might be, I don't know, it might be the problem that you're trying to solve in some deepest way that's uniting all these elements of exploration and interest.
I don't know, you're asking too hard a question. I don't know. Sometimes I don't see any overriding principle. I mean, there's a sort of thing, something feels right. Now, why does it feel right? I mean, that could be something very subtle.
Yeah.
It may be wrong, too.
Oh, maybe
they are wrong.
Yes.
So
but it seems to me that also is related in some important sense psychologically to that notion of understanding. The feeling that it's right. It's interesting that it can be wrong, but it's also interesting that it can be a predictor of, like I had a student, she was very creative, and she would come up with hypotheses that were damn good, but she was more creative than the typical psychologist, and I don't say that in a denigrating way. I mean, she was more like an artist than a researcher. And then what she would do is spend like 6 months writing out the algorithmic pathway to that conclusion, even though that is not how she derived it. But she had a pretty unerring ability to jump forward to the right place with her intuition. And it's something like a deep form of pattern recognition. You don't need the full pattern to infer what the pattern might be. You can have a sparse representation of it, leap to what might be analogous to a tiling solution, I suppose. And that seems to be something related to the accuracy of intuition. I know when people become schizotypal, for example, and paranoid, that also happens in paranoia, they have a lot of intuitions about patterns that might be there, but most of them are wrong. And it's like their pattern recognition system has become, well, it's exceeded the limits of its capacity for accuracy and is starting to see pattern in what's truly random. Prediction error.
Yeah, well,